Hello, welcome. Welcome. This is the global community for adults who are healing CPTSD. My name is Athena, and this is this is our group. This is where we have all been joining together with one another about once a week for over 11 years now. And I'm so grateful to be able to be here with you week after week. I want to pause and say thank you to John Harvey, Ninja Taco, Kira, Vi, Jeffrey Sherman, and so many more of you who have been here with us for several years. And many of you are you're in the chat box and you're making sure that our community has a safe space to arrive and to connect with one another every single week. So for each and every one of you, you know who you are. I'm sure I'm leaving out so many more of you, but just want you to know how grateful I am. And as always, I want to bring awareness to the fact that this YouTube channel is made possible by you. Each of you who decides to vote on the video, thumbs up or thumbs down, or chooses to attend the live stream every Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern, or those of you who choose to share this live stream or this recording with others, or add it to a playlist of any kind. All of these tiny little things that you do that are actually the really, really big things. It lets the people at YouTube and Google know that we are connecting and providing a place that is helpful and supportive and meaningful for others. So thank you to each of you. And this YouTube channel is sponsored by the Foundation for Post-Traumatic Healing and Complex Trauma Research. We have daily recovery support calls for adults who are healing complex PTSD twice a day, every day. There's a link in the description section of the video, in the pinned comment, and I'll place a link in the chat box. If you'd like to join us there, there are several hundred of us on any given day. If my notifications that come through on my phone are correct, there are close to 1,000 people that are there. Whether it's a message sent back and forth to another community member, or in one of the threads, in one of the it's peer-to-peer connection away from social media is what it is. So thank you for participating. Thank you for showing up for you. And I'm going to pause before we get started. We are actually we are on week 18 of our open discussion group that we have every week about Pete Walker's most recent book titled Holistically Treating Complex PTSD, a 6-Dimensional Approach. So thank you to each of you who meaningfully contribute every single week to the discussion. And thank you especially to those who keep the place, like the placeholder. I'm thinking of, I think it's Kitty and Karen, and there are a couple others of you who remember what page we are on. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, we are on page 354, and we are in chapter 11 in a section that is subtitled Parental Abandonment Creates Self-Abandonment. So this is your 10,000 trigger warnings, as Nate Postlewaite would say. And just letting you know that we're going to be talking about parental abandonment, and that is never a fun topic to sit with, glance at, or hold space for, because it brings up a lot of grief. So before we get started, I'm going to just get a sip of water and say hello to each and every one of you who have chosen to be here today. Thank you so much for your presence. Let me just get a sip of water so I can say hi to everyone, and then we will get started. And if you are watching this on a replay and you just want to fast forward to the content, I'm sure it's probably safe to just fast forward to 10 minutes. That's usually what we do. We usually warmly welcome each person here by name and share crisis resources in the chat box, and we get started with our open discussion and the content that we are going through at about 10 minutes after. I want to check in with everyone. If you could let me know how the volume is. I just like to make sure that it's not too loud, not too soft. Make sure that it's just right. A warm welcome to you, Jeffrey Sherman, and Brave Vanessa, and Karen, and John Harvey, and Craig, and Jen, and Kitty, and Candida. I'm leaving so many people out, I'm sure. Hello, Ninja Taco. So good to see you, Recovery Buddy. Hello, Nadine. Hello to anyone else I did not greet by name. I'm so grateful that you are here. So glad that you found us. Welcome, welcome. Thank you, Jen, for letting me know that the volume is good. Thank you, Jeffrey Sherman. Thank you, Brave Vanessa. Hello, Warrior. Hello. Long time no see. Always so good to see you. Welcome, welcome. Ooh, berry tea sounds absolutely delicious. Yum. Thank you for letting me know, John Harvey. Yes, Jeffrey Sherman says, I'm holding space for all who are grieving. I understand. The family understands. Yes, you all are my family, my friendly family of choice. Or as Simene says, found family. You all are my found family. And I'm so glad to have found you. So, yes, thank you for confirming the page. We're going to go ahead and get started. We are at the top of page 354. And if you didn't catch it a few moments ago, this is your 10,000 trigger warnings, because we will be discussing openly the reality that some parents abandon their children repeatedly, over and over and over and over again, multiple times a day, every day, for the better part of 2 decades. And if you're raising your hand, so am I. You're not alone. Even though you were alone, and it felt like you were all alone because you were, I'm glad you're here. So grateful you're here. So grateful you found us. And we are all in this together now. And here we go. Pete says at the top of page 354, untreated survivors remain trapped in 6 dimensions of symptoms because no one has taught and modeled effective recovery principles to them. Their chronic 6D abandonment as children progressively drove them into desperate attempts to escape their pain and stalled out. Whoops. Sorry. I moved my book on accident. Their chronic 6D abandonment as children progressively drove them into desperate attempts to escape their pain and stalled out the development of all 6 levels of their inborn intelligence. Most untreated adult survivors still squander their lives trying to dodge the pain caused by their 6D developmental arrests. I'm going to pause, and I'm just going to, for anyone who's finding us for the very first time and has not been here with us for 17 weeks, the 6D that Pete Walker is referring to are the 6 dimensions from his book, Holistically Treating Complex PTSD, a 6-dimensional approach, and those 6 dimensions are related to developmental arrest or arrested development, developmental trauma, meaning that there was dysfunction, neglect, abuse, or exploitation, or a combination of all of those during your formative years. And those 6 dimensions are relational development, behavioral development, cognitive development, emotional development, somatic or body awareness development, and spiritual development. So whenever Pete says 6D, those are the 6 dimensions he is speaking of, the 6 layers of developmental arrest. And that is what complex PTSD shows up as. It points to and brings light to the fact that we were not able to develop appropriately relationally, behaviorally, cognitively, emotionally, somatically, or spiritually. So back to second paragraph, page 354. Most untreated adult survivors still squander their lives trying to dodge the pain caused by their 6D developmental arrests. They unconsciously over-rely on their embedded 4F defenses, over-controlling others, the fight types, constant hurrying and worrying via enslavement to productivity, fight types, numbing out, freeze types, or distracting themselves by overhelping others rather than themselves, fawn types. I believe that there is a typo here. I believe that the over-controlling of others is fight, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and I could be wrong, the constant hurrying and worrying via enslavement to productivity is actually flight and not fight, as it reads in the book. Third paragraph, page 354. The core pain they are dodging is the death-like feelings of their abandonment depression. The horrible felt experience of constant hopelessness and helplessness in their traumatizing childhood still aches in them as chronic angst. This is a complex depression, so heavy that it recurringly plagues them with suicidal ideation. Such survivors are repetitively triggered into excruciating flashbacks by the merest hint of feeling depressed, which so often explodes into the bleak darkness of total alienation from themselves and others. Hence, a key goal in treating developmental trauma disorder, also known as CPTSD, is to awaken and develop survivors' capacity to self-supportingly weather normal experiences of depression. However, because their parents abandoned them so thoroughly for being depressed, they do the same to themselves. Many squander their existence living what T.S. Eliot called lives of quiet desperation. Therapists can use the mindfulness process in chapters 8 and 9 to awaken survivors' innate capacity to respond to their depression with compassion. Top of page 355. This, in turn, aids them to gradually diminish the fear and shame that they were conditioned to feel about the normal experiences of depression. Reducing reactivity to depression is typically a long, win some, lose some labor of healthy self-love. Western culture routinely makes this harder by humiliating those who dare to show their depression. Normal displays of depression are often pathologized, as if they are treasonous violations of one's patriotic duty to place the pursuit of happiness at the top of their flagpoles. How sad it is that many modern spiritual perspectives often inadvertently shame their followers for exhibiting depression, including some leading proponents of mindfulness. Taboos about depression even emanate from the psychological establishment, where most schools strip it of its status as a legitimate feeling. For them, depression is nothing more than a waste product of negative thinking. It is also commonly seen as a dysfunctional state that results from the repression of minimally less taboo emotions like sadness and anger. This is not to say that repressed and suppressed emotions do not cause depression, but it is to say, however, that depression, anger, and sadness are legitimate feelings. Accepting that is a vital element of emotional intelligence. Healthy depression often contains helpful, important, and sometimes crucial information. This important fact is explored more deeply in the Dissolving Depression section of Chapter 9. Leslie Hazelton's wise book titled The Right to Feel Bad further illuminates the vital intelligence that is often encoded in depression. Finally, the acceptance of one's normal experiences of depression is often the final step in recovering, enduring self-esteem. Once survivors achieve this, they truly know that there is nothing inside themselves that they need to dread or shame, hate, flee, or distract themselves from. When this occurs, unconditional self-acceptance has become a self-perpetuating process that usually makes short work of the critic and its flashbacks. I'm going to pause right there, and I really want to highlight this very last paragraph of page 355 because it's the secret sauce. It's the crux of the entire section thus far. Because what Pete is doing here is he's inviting us into what Marshall Bircher calls pause, acknowledge, observe, or PAO, and ALI, which is acknowledge, legitimize, and integrate. If you're a note taker, look into Marshall Bircher's work. If you enjoy Pete Walker's work, you will enjoy Marshall Bircher's work. His name is spelt Marshall, M-A-R-S-H-A-L-L, Bircher, B-U-R-T-C-H-E-R. And his website is freetheself.com. Free as in free, F-R-E-E, the, T-H-E, self, S-E-L-F.com. He also has a YouTube channel, and he has hundreds and hundreds of free nervous system regulation tools that I have found to be invaluable and hope-sustaining and life-giving. So I'm going to read this last paragraph here, and I want you to look at this last paragraph or listen to this last paragraph through the lens of Marshall Bircher's model of pause, acknowledge, observe, or acknowledge, legitimize, integrate. Okay? Pete says, last paragraph, page 355, he says, finally, the acceptance of one's normal experiences of depression is often the final step in recovering, enduring self-esteem. Now I'm going to pause there. In order for us to accept the fact that we experience depression, we must first pause, acknowledge what it is that we are feeling, and observe our depression through a lens of legitimization and acceptance. To go just one step further, if we pause and we acknowledge that we are, as Pete is discussing here in the last paragraph, experiencing depression, and Pete says that accepting our normal experiences of depression is often the final step of recovering. Enduring self-esteem, Marshall Bircher talks about this as self-worth, not self-esteem. Self-worth is something you were born with, okay? And it can't be added to or taken away from, and it is independent of any person, place, or thing. It just is, right? It's our worth. It's what we have. So if we take Pete Walker's word here, where he says, finally, the acceptance of one's normal experiences of depression is often the final step in recovering, enduring self-esteem, and we apply that grid, we're pausing, we're acknowledging our normal expression and experience of depression as the final step in our recovery process. Okay, we're observing it. We are legitimizing it. It's valid, it's legitimate, it's real, right? And we offer care and comfort. We accept it. We warmly hold space for, pause, acknowledge, observe, legitimize, and integrate with compassion and warmth and kindness and care. And that leads to enduring feelings. Pete calls it self-esteem here. Last paragraph. And he goes on to say, once, please don't miss this, once survivors achieve this, they truly know that there is nothing inside themselves that they need to dread, shame, hate, flee, or distract themselves from. And when this occurs, unconditional self-acceptance has become a self-perpetuating process that usually makes short work of the critic and flashbacks. You all, I don't know who needed to hear that like a second, third, and fifth time, but I'm just telling you right now, last paragraph, page 355, this is the recipe right here, just like we did last week. I'm telling you, when we are kind and patient and gentle with ourselves, and we pause, we slow down, we acknowledge our normal, Pete says it's normal experience of depression, right? He says it's the final step, right? And he says once we achieve this, we truly know that there is nothing inside of us that we need to dread or shame or hate or flee or distract ourselves from. This is huge. This right here, this could be our entire discussion this evening. It could be everything. We're moving to the top of page 356, where Pete says, are you ready for it? However, here is a caveat. The virulent critic should never be tolerated. It never totally dies and can so easily be reactivated in a flashback. Well-practiced survivors, however, quickly recognize the critic, block it, and disidentify from it. And with enough regular practice over time, they discover that the critic shrinks, becomes easier to dismiss. And they also learn to recognize helpful messages from the healthy critic or the superego. And such information typically arises in a kind and rational way that enhances the survivor's ongoing growth and development. Okay? You all, this is so helpful and supportive. Middle of page 356, self-abandoning stages and cycles of reactivity. Pete says, here is a diagram of the cycles of defensive reactions that survivors suffer when they emotionally flash back into the abandonment melange and abandonment depression. Therapists can use this diagram like a map to educate and guide survivors to identify and deconstruct each stage of their symptom exacerbating reactivity. Survivors can then deprogram themselves from their unconscious habits of abandoning and attacking themselves when they are suffering an emotional flashback or any other kind of pain. This diagram also illustrates the bi-directional merry-go-round of the painful self-abandoning process that survivors get stuck in and often suffer for long periods of time. When triggered into a flashback, survivors can stall out in any stage of these cycles and or vacillate for varying periods between stages. Now, what I'd like to do is I think I would like to try to take a picture of this diagram and bring it up on the screen for you because I really feel that it would be helpful for you. So let me see if I can do that really quick. Let me see here. All right, let's see if I can bring this up on the screen. Let me work on the background music here. There you go. I'm just gonna bring this up for you so that you can see it. Okay. Okay. Let's see if I can. Pete Walker, page 357. Holistically treating complex PTSD. There we go. Let me see if I can bring this up. Hopefully this will work. One second here. There we go. Thank you for your patience while I try to do this for you. Hopefully you're able to see this okay. Hopefully this will that's the bottom. Oh no, there's more. There we go. Let me see. I want to make sure you all can see that. Okay. I hope that you all can see it. Okay. Oh, wonderful. Hello, Ashton. Hello, Kate. Hello to anyone else I didn't get an opportunity to greet by name. So glad to see you. So let's dive in, shall we? So at the very, very top, we have, these are the 4 F's at the top: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And then in brackets beneath fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, please don't miss this. And for anyone that's in the comment section right now, if you want to maybe place a note in the comments on the rendered video and the replay that there is a diagram that starts at about 30 minutes past. That way it explains everything in case they fast forward through it and they don't know where to find it. So the 4 F's, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, in brackets, Pete has described how they most often present. Okay? Now the fight trauma response most often presents as highly pronounced narcissistic traits. This does not mean NPD. This does not mean malignant narcissism. This does not mean that you're an abuser. This does not mean that you're just like them. What this means is, in a healthy superego way, if we're using Pete Walker's vernacular, a healthy critic or a healthy superego, as per top of page 356, what this looks like is you think of yourself, you prioritize your needs, and you have healthy criticism about yourself. And when you are in a 4F response, okay, that means that the healthy superego has traveled into a direction of you placing your needs above others in a way that is at the expense of their well-being. You're in a trauma response. When you're in your right mind, when you're a complex trauma survivor, there's nothing in the whole world that would cause you to ever, I've gotten the opportunity to meet dozens of you in person and thousands of you virtually. And I know, if I've heard it once, I've heard it thousands of times, there's nothing in the world that you would want less than being just like them, than becoming narcissistically abusive in any way. When Pete has in brackets under the word fight, narcissistic, he means that you're in a trauma response that's causing you to behave in a way that can be perceived as narcissistic in getting your own needs met at the expense of someone else's well-being. Okay? The flight trauma response, if we're on the second F of the 4 F's, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, flight presents itself most commonly in obsessive compulsive behavior, right? Now, interestingly, many of you know that I've mapped my CPTSD. I started mapping it several years ago, and I am mostly a freeze fawn when I'm in the presence of people who are toxic or abusive or like a life-threatening situation. But if I'm around healthy enough, safe enough others, I go into flight. And it's interesting that Pete put in brackets here obsessive compulsive. We feel safe enough to be controlling and sort of busy, go, sort of obsessively trying to control the outcome of things, right? Because if that were a toxic person, at least for me personally, I would freeze and dissociate, which is in brackets underneath the third F, or I would fawn, meaning that I would become whatever I needed to be in order to save my life in that moment. So it's interesting if we can look at our CPTSD and we can ascertain and figure out and come up with language that helps us find the most adaptive versions of our 4 F's. Now, if we're in a trauma response, That's maladaptive, obviously. It's not ideal for us to be in a trauma response. But the reality of life is, on any given day, forever and ever and ever, with 8 billion people on the planet, there is a likelihood that we are going to experience a trigger, right? And the longer we show up for ourselves, the deeper we heal. And for the longer we heal, we go into the 4Fs less frequently and for less frequently and for fewer minutes at a time, or days or weeks or whatever it might be for you. So it decreases. The intensity diminishes, the frequency decreases, and the time in which we are in a trauma response decreases. That's what Pete was talking about last week and for the past several weeks, right? So if we look at this diagram, we have fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, the 4Fs. We have in brackets the ways they show up most often. And then right underneath that, we have the way that Pete talks about how we end up behaving with ourselves and with others. We tend to be controlling if we're in a fight response, which is different than obsessively and compulsively doing things, which is being busy and go, and do, which is the second F. And then if we're in a freeze trauma response or we're dissociating, we tend to sort of space out, or maladaptive daydreaming, right? Maladaptive daydreaming is a thing for complex trauma survivors. It's oftentimes like a daily thing that we sort of struggle with. And then lastly, fawn, we merge with the other. Or as Richard Grannon says, we have the urge to merge. We meet someone, we instantly want to merge with them, be close to them, become whatever it is that we need to become so that we can be closer to them and connect with them on a deeper level. We merge our needs, wants, and schedules and preferences. We merge with other people, right? We seek to figure out what it is that we want, who we are, how we're doing, where we're going, what we would prefer. We merge with another person, right? That's how it shows up. So those are the 4Fs. And then it says here, if you look at Pete's diagram up on the screen, if we go to the left, we have an inner critic attack. The inner critic is attacking us because our 4Fs are showing up, right? And the inner critic is telling us that we need to figure that out. We need to stop it. We need to perfect it. We're in danger, right? If we don't stop controlling or being busy, go, or dissociating or merging with others, if we don't perfectly stop doing that forever and ever, all day, every day, forever, then we're going to die. Or we should die, right? That's what the inner critic tells us. And then that leads us to self-abandon, because abandonment was modeled for us by less than loving caregivers. And that moves us down to the bottom into the abandonment melange, which is a cycle of fear, shame, and depression. Round and round and round and round and round and round it goes, the merry-go-round, right? And then once we're experiencing the fear and the shame and depression on repeat, then we move, we're going counterclockwise here. We move up to 9 o'clock on the clock here, where it says abandonment, depression, helplessness, and hopelessness, right? The fear, shame, and depression cause us to feel helpless and hopeless. And then that is a trigger for us because it reminds us of our childhood where we felt helpless and hopeless. And then we go back up to the top into our 4Fs, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, and we start trying to control everybody and everything, or we just busy ourselves, or we just binge, scroll, eat, drink, drug, whatever, sex, whatever it is that we do to get away from everything, right? Or we merge with other people, and that's a great distraction. And then once that happens, then we realize that we're self-abandoning, because that in and of itself is self-abandonment, which leads us down to the abandonment melange, where we feel afraid that this is how it's always going to be. We feel ashamed that that's what we're going through, and we feel depressed because we're never going to get out of this. And then the inner critic decides that it's going to tell us that we're total losers because all we are is feeling continuously afraid, ashamed, and depressed. And like, why do we even bother living? Like, why are we even alive, right? And then that passive or active suicidal ideation is a trigger that leads us back up into the 4Fs. And then, depending on which 4F we're into, we either have an inner critic injunction, or we are just completely and totally helpless and hopeless, which leads us to the abandonment melange, and round and round and round and round and round and round it goes. So the good news is, on the next page, Pete starts to break this down a bit. Okay? So here we go. Top of page 358. Pete says, here are the two most common patterns of survivors' cyclical reactions to emotional flashbacks. In the first, survivors wake up in a flashback feeling helpless, alienated, and hopelessly depressed. Key characteristics of the abandonment depression itself. Such experiences of depression and abandonment immediately trigger survivors into fear and shame, which then activates panicky inner critic thinking, which in turn launches them into their most habitual adrenalized fight, flight, freeze, or fawn trauma response. Respectively, triggered survivors then lash out peevishly at the nearest person if they're in a fight response, or they launch busily into anxious productivity if they're in a flight response, or they turn to their favorite screen, foggily tune out or doze off again if they're in a freeze response, or they redirect their attention to fixing someone else's problems rather than attending to their own concerns if they're in a fawn response. All this typically happens so quickly that the untreated survivor does not notice the precursors of depression, fear, or shame, inner critic, or their particular 4F reaction. Therapists, however, can psychoeducate and guide survivors to notice when they abruptly launch into their most typical 4F response. They can then learn to see this launching as evidence that they are in a flashback, and they need to invoke the 13 steps of flashback management, which you all know you're able to find at pete-walker.com. And then on the left-hand side of the website, you click on flashback management. Fourth paragraph, page 358. As survivors' recovery progresses, therapists can further educate them on how the virulent critic uses perfectionistic and endangerment programs to thwart and distract them into self-attack and constant toxic shame, which is also evidence of being in a flashback. Last paragraph, page 358. Eventually, therapists can use mindfulness training to help survivors recognize and diminish the fear and shame that fuel the critic. With enough practice, survivors can learn the Chapter 9 mindfulness technique of non-reactively and self-compassionately feeling through the core of their childhood pain, the abandonment depression itself. Typically, this is the last domino of emotional recovery to fall. A second common cycle of reactivity operates in reverse. This often occurs in early recovery when survivors suddenly notice that they have slipped back into dysfunctional 4F behavior. The inner critic then flashes into a perfectionistic rant such as, "I'm such a loser. I will never recover. No wonder no one likes me." And when this occurs, the survivor's own voice triggers them deeper into the toxic shame and drasticizing fear of the abandonment melange, and then dumps them back into the death-like paralysis of the abandonment depression, which then magnifies their helplessness and hopelessness. Eventually, out of desperation to escape the morbid paralysis of the abandonment depression, the initial cycle revs up again in reverse as the survivor dissociates into their key 4F defense, which then activates the perfectionism and endangerment processes of the inner critic, which then pumps up the drasticizing fear, toxic shame, and despair of the abandonment melange, which once again dumps them back into the hopeless, helpless desolation of the abandonment depression itself, whereby torpor and ennui are turned into such condemnations as, I've got to get my lazy, worthless ass out of bed, or I will end up like that homeless bag lady in the park. Such nightmarish visions then once again relaunch them back into fighting, fleeing, freezing, or fawning. Many survivors spend much of their lives careening back and forth through these cycles of endless internal trauma. Perhaps it is these cycles that account for the feeling of dizziness or spiraling down that many survivors have during these intense flashbacks. Here is a more detailed clinical example of how triggering works in the reverse direction. Pete says, bottom of page 359, my mega perfectionistic flight type client, Mario, came into our session 5 minutes late. It was the first time he had been late in 2 years of therapy. He was in warp speed flight mode, sweating from racing up the hill from his parking space a block away, and he told me that he just could not sit on the couch today. Can I please just pace in front of the couch? I hate being late. I hate it. I won't tell you. And please don't ask me how fast I was driving on the freeway. Mario compulsively paced, but this drivenness was nothing compared to the speed of his obsessing mind as he rattled off his many versions of the inner critic attack programs on list 3 in chapter 12. To him, his being late was merely the tip of the iceberg of his defectiveness. As his ranting against himself amped up, he increasingly frightened himself with his own words and shamed himself with his parents' disgust. Ugh, my parents were right. I'm nothing but a pile of shit. No, worse than that. All I do is add to global warming every time I breathe out the pure oxygen I ruined by turning it into carbon dioxide. Finally, seemingly exhausted, Mario collapsed onto the couch and launched into the first suicidal ideation I had ever heard from him. He sank instantly past the fear and shame that encrusted his despair into the cauldron of the abandonment depression he had just landed in. Immediately he succumbed to the torpor of the real helplessness and hopelessness of his childhood. He momentarily surrendered to the thanatos, I don't know what that word is, and wished that he were dead. Fortunately, the, quote, grieving seeds that I had been planting in his psyche in our earlier work finally sprouted, and for the first time since early childhood, Mario's tears came. And it was the most moving monsoon I had witnessed in ages. He cried for the little forsaken boy he had been, and then for the flashback, beleaguered man he was now. He came home via his pain to being on his side. The long exile into self-abandonment was temporarily over for the first time that he could remember. We were then able to look at the cycle of reactivity that had turned into a cyclone, triggered by a traffic jam into the unforgivable danger of being late. CPTSD launched him into his flight response as he raced to get to my office. The flight response simultaneously triggered the inner critic to attack him for his lateness, and then to catastrophize about the consequences. I won't blame you if you want to fire me from being your client. And then he fell, scraping against the walls of shame and fear into the abandonment depression itself. This time, however, Mario broke the flashback with his tears. His bountiful crying released his fear and shame, and this, in turn, defueled his critic and allowed his body to begin releasing the sympathetic nervous system hyperarousal of his flight response and make a soothing shift into parasympathetic nervous system response, relaxation. Had he not been able to do this, to cry, he likely would have continued attacking himself with shame-fueled perfectionism and fear-fueled drasticizing. He would then have launched out of the session back to obsessively and compulsively racing through his day, driven by his cat-o'-nine-tails to-do list. I don't know about you all, but I just feel such empathy and compassion for Mario. I've been Mario. Page 361, middle of the page, in a subsection titled The Layers of Dissociation in the Cycles of Reactivity. Pete says, the stages in the cycles of reactivity, up on the screen, the image that you see on the screen, can also be seen as being somewhat layered. As such, the reactions in the cycle of reactivity are layered defenses and distractions against the core abandonment depression. Each layer is also a defense against all the other layers beneath it. Each layer is a type of dissociation. When survivors are triggered and lost in the 4F response, they fight, flee, freeze, or fawn to dissociate themselves from the painful voice of the critic. On a deeper layer, the critic is also distracting and dissociating from them the emotional pain of their fear and shame, which in turn dissociates them from the most painful bottom layer, the abandonment depression of the death-like forsakenness itself. CPTSD dissociation then creates the process of becoming unconscious of all these levels of psychological pain. As trauma recovery progresses, therapists need to guide survivors to identify and act therapeutically to all levels of these flashback cycles. This begins with recognizing and deconstructing any unhelpful 4F reactions in their current behavior. Let's pause there and let's read that sentence again. As their trauma recovery progresses, therapists need to guide survivors to identify and act therapeutically to all levels of these flashback cycles. Think about Marshall Bircher's pause, acknowledge, observe, acknowledge, legitimize, integrate. Pete says this begins with recognizing, which we can do if we pause and acknowledge, right? We recognize it. And Pete says, bottom of page 361, deconstructing, right? So that means that we are observing it closely, right? And if we're deconstructing it and we're pulling it apart, then what we're going to do is we're going to legitimize that. And when we pull it apart and we see all the inner working pieces, we're going to be integrating. So Pete says, this begins with recognizing and deconstructing any unhelpful 4F reactions in their current behavior. So let's glance at the diagram on the screen, and let's up at the top, the 4Fs, and let's think of any unhelpful 4F reactions that we can recall, right? All we have to do is acknowledge that. All we have to do is hold space with that. Just pause, acknowledge it, observe it, recognize it, legitimize. Of course, this is what we're doing. Of course, this is what we're going through. Of course, we're fighting and fleeing and freezing and fawning. How could it be any other way? Were we taught differently? What was modeled for us? Right? We offer care. Wrapping up, Pete says, top of page 362, with growing awareness, survivors can then stay present enough to see the critic's role in triggering and exacerbating their flashbacks, and this, in turn, allows them to practice critic shrinking. Therapists can help survivors to perceive, grieve out, and mindfully metabolize or integrate the fear and shame that fuels the critic. Finally, with sufficient feeling into fear and shame, therapists can help survivors see how fear and shame cover up the dire, deadened feeling of their original abandonment depression, which is caused by parental abandonment. Encouraging survivors to stay self-supportingly present to the feelings and sensations of this depression is a highly transformative accomplishment in trauma recovery. As therapists re-stimulate and help survivors develop their arrested self-compassion and self-protectiveness, they are increasingly able to healthily process all levels of their pain. They can learn to do so without resorting to the dissociative defenses that exacerbate it. And as a result, their self-esteem steadily develops. And when it reaches critical mass, they love and care for themselves, even when, especially when, they are depressed. Bottom of page 362, in a little section that Pete has called sub-cycles of reactivity. And this is just a little preview of what we're doing next week. Pete says, survivors often get stuck for long periods of time in specific stages or layers of the cycles of reactivity. When therapists recognize these subcycles, they can teach survivors to identify and rescue themselves from these not-so-merry-go-rounds of pain. And next week, top of page 363, sub-cycles of internal and external triggering. Okay? So we're ending tonight with a little preview that next week we will be talking about the sub-cycles of internal and external triggering. And we will tease it all apart, deconstruct it, sit with it, and of course, just be here with one another. So if you'd like one last moment to screenshot, please feel free to go ahead and screenshot that before I take it down. Actually, it won't go down. Let me just move it. Nope. Oh, there we go. There, it worked. Oh, just want to check in with you. Thank you all so much for spending the last hour with me. Yeah, Brave Vanessa says, I feel so called out by Pete Walker. Me too. Oh, I'm sure that he wouldn't have wanted you to feel
shame. That's exactly what we're dealing with here. He wants us to not feel so much shame. Hello, Greg. Welcome, welcome. So glad you're here. Thank you. I'm figuring out all the technical things. For anyone here who's prone to shame spirally feelings, I see you. You are not alone. I am there, right? Yes, I really want to highlight the comment that Lisa Marie has made here. Lisa Marie says, that was powerful when we acknowledge any 4F behaviors with compassion. Boom, that right there. I'm telling you, if you like Pete Walker's work, you will love Marshall Bircher. He is like the soft-spoken, like, relative of Pete Walker. And Pete Walker is a little bit soft-spoken, by the way. Like, I mean, he's not completely soft-spoken, but Marshall is definitely soft-spoken. But just gentle, 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 gentle. And warm and compassionate and kind and wise. Like so, 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 so wise. And finding out ways, just tagging on what Lisa Marie said, finding ways to be compassionate when I am stuck in a shame spiral or in an inner critic attack, it's been a game changer. And when Pete Walker talks about waking up in a flashback, that shit is real, okay? I occasionally, it used to be a lot, but lately it's only like, a few times a month. But I will wake up with my heart beating out of my chest, already in a full-blown flashback. Like I must have woken up groggy in a place of like sadness or something. But then I go into that, that diagram where I go into the fear and the terror. And then I'm stuck. And then the critic is like shaming me for being back in this, this place again. Like, what a loser. Like, are you going to be like this forever, Athena? Like, what the hell's your problem? You're going to be 52 years old. Like, you're a grown-ass woman. Why is your heart beating out of your chest? Like, you're literally safe. There's nothing around. What's your problem? Right? Finding ways, which I use Marshall Bircher's, he calls it the DRP, the Daily Regulation Practices. It's free. It's on his website, freetheself.com. And ever since I started doing that, I'm able to show up for myself compassionately and be kind and gentle and patient with myself, right? Yeah. So I hope you found this helpful and supportive. And oh, you're so welcome. You're so welcome. I'm so glad that you all were here. Yeah. Kitty says, I don't know if I've ever woken up in a flashback. Then again, I don't think I even noticed my flashbacks most of the time. Yeah, that was me. I didn't know what life was or what flashbacks were. Like, I didn't know the difference for a lot of years. And then I had kind of a little bit of a bout of like peace and ease and just being able to be fully, like when I first learned about mindfulness and like what that even was, like just being in the present moment, I started experiencing bodily sensations. I started becoming my somatic awareness, or as Pete Walker talks about it, one of my 6Ds. It's the fifth one, the somatic dimension, my developmental arrest of my somatic awareness. I started like becoming aware of my body. And then I realized that most of the time I was cruising along with like a baseline, like homeostasis. And then something would happen and I would all of a sudden be in a flashback. Like my heart would be beating out of my chest, or my mouth would feel dry, or my palms would feel clammy. And it was just really, really strange, right? So I just want you all to know that you're not alone wherever you find yourself in this. I'm at that point now where I feel like the majority of my time is spent with peace and ease, and I'm very intentional, I'm very mindful, I'm very present. If we're going like full polyvagal, I'm like, or like IFS or EMDR, like whatever modality it is with the vernacular, find your vernacular. I have access to my C's, right? Like my calm, my compassion. I'm cognizant, I'm confident, competent, capable, curious. Like, that's where I spend most of my time. And when something happens and I'm outside of my window of tolerance, if we're going to go like, like talk about like somatically, like somatic experiencing, I know it, I realize it. And then I'm able to apply compassion when I need compassion, or if I'm in a situation where I need to activate my self protectiveness, as Pete Walker calls it, that is self advocacy. That is establishing and maintaining a boundary. And that comes into play as well. Pete always talks about self compassion and self protectiveness as both sides of the same coin. And I find that to be so, so, so very helpful. So, yeah, I'm just so very grateful that we're having these open discussions. Seriously, it's so important. Yes, it is so. Oh, I'm so glad. Oh, you all are so welcome. It is a terrible feeling, Jeffrey. I agree. Oh, yeah. Thank you, Jeffrey. You know what? Hi, Jesse. I didn't get a chance to say hi to you earlier. Hello, Jesse. So glad you're here. Hello to anyone else I didn't greet by name. Oh, you're very welcome. Yes, Greg, I agree. It is wonderful to hang out with like-minded souls. My chat box is moving really, really, really fast. So I will see you all. Let me see if I can. Get our link to our community away from social media. If that is something you are interested in, that would be wonderful. We have calls like this twice a day, every day. And if not, that's okay. I'll be back here next Monday and every Monday. Hello, Laura. So glad to have you here with us. Welcome, welcome. We are so glad to warmly welcome you. You're very welcome, Jesse. Oh, I missed it, Vanessa. I missed it. Something's going on with Vanessa. Where did it go? I missed it. Bummer. I'm cheering you on. So I'll be back here next Monday and every Monday if I don't see you away from social media. And you're so welcome, Ashton. It's so good to be here with you. Oh, good job. Brave Vanessa set a boundary line today. I am high-fiving you. For real. Seriously. That's big. Oh, you all are incredible. Well, as Angie would say, thank you all for being in my life. Thank you for allowing me to be in yours. Jen says, have a great evening, everyone. Thank you for all your support. You're all beautiful peoples inside and out. You are beautiful peoples inside and out too, Jen. Thank you for being here. You are so welcome, Jeffrey. Oh, goodbye to you too, Kitty. You're very welcome. So please be extra kind and patient and gentle with yourselves, as Jeffrey would say, because you're worth it. Good night to you, Candida. Candida says for all of us to have a good night. So I will see you all very, very soon. Good night, everyone.